So we have spent a lot of time comparing the four beasts of Daniel's vision to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, especially the fourth beast and the final phases of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. But now we're going to look at another comparison. We're going to compare, let's see, is this the one I want to look at? So this is page 7 of your little packet. This is a drawing by Clarence Larkin. And he takes not only Nebuchadnezzar's statue in Daniel 2 and the four beasts of Daniel 7 that we've been talking about, but he layers that over the ram and he-goat of Daniel 8. And in addition to that, he compares this to the beasts of Revelation. So on this very detailed chart, you've got Daniel 2, you've got Daniel 7, but also you have the relationship between this fourth beast and the two beasts of Revelation. So there's going to be a beast from the sea and there's going to be a scarlet beast. So this fourth beast relates to both of those, and that's what our focus is going to be for the rest of the lesson. Comparing Daniel's fourth beast to the beast described in Revelation 17 and the beast described in Revelation 13. We're also going to be talking a lot about the Antichrist. If you haven't figured it out already, this little horn is the Antichrist, what the New Testament calls the Antichrist. It's got a lot of titles, but it's the Antichrist. And again, the little horn of Daniel 8 will also correspond with the Antichrist. And that will have a specific relationship with the beast of Revelation 13. And if we take the power of that beast of Revelation 13 and we focus it down into an individual, there will be an image of that beast as well. So we're gonna step through a lot of information from Revelation, and it's very detailed. So we're gonna go through it little by little. Comparing Daniel and Revelation. In Revelation 12, we read about the dragon, that old serpent, the original serpent from the garden, the devil himself. He's described as a dragon. Now, what we have to remember as we're reading about all of these empires is that God, the only sovereign, permits enemy nations to have power over his people as a form of judgment. Think about how Daniel felt about King Nebuchadnezzar or King Darius, or all of the kings that he had to serve in an enemy nation. He probably didn't like them. Maybe we don't approve of our leaders, but think about Daniel serving Nebuchadnezzar, right? Well, Nebuchadnezzar had a kingdom that God set him over. In Jeremiah says that Nebuchadnezzar was the servant of the Lord. He was establishing God's purposes. God was working through Nebuchadnezzar. He set him up as king, gave him Babylon in order to judge his people Israel. So even though we're reading about these Gentile empires ruling over Israel, and here in a minute, I'm going to imply that behind these empires is the dragon, okay? We're going to see that in the imagery, but over all of that is God. He is sovereign, he's over everything, and he permits Satan or the devil to rule through these empire kingdom, these Gentile empires. But God is sovereign over all. So behind these oppressive earthly empires lurks invisible spiritual powers of darkness, but again, God is sovereign over all. The head of those invisible spiritual powers, flesh and blood, but against powers, principalities, and spiritual forces in high places. So there are spiritual forces behind the kingdoms or the empires. So in Revelation 12:3, it says, "And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads." So this imagery, it's not necessarily that if you saw Satan, he would look like a dragon, but we're taking these physical characteristics to describe this spiritual entity. If we could describe the spiritual person of Satan, he would be a ferocious, great red dragon. And it says he has 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. So I want you to count heads, horns, and crowns as we go through this. So the description of Satan in Revelation 12, he's a red dragon. He has 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. Okay. Now, if we go back to Daniel's visions, okay, Daniel had a vision of 4 beasts. And what's interesting is that if you count the heads of Daniel's 4 beasts, you're going to get 7 heads. 1 from the lion, 1 from the bear, that's 2. You've got 4 on the leopard, so that's 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 1 on the 4th beast. So Daniel's distinct, separate, discrete beasts, if we put them all together, there's 7 heads there. And Daniel's 4th beast has 10 horns. So there's definitely a correlation there between the number of heads of the dragon and these beasts with 7 heads and 10 horns, which represent Gentile empires on the earth. Okay, so you can already begin to see a correspondence between the work of Satan himself and these Gentile empires. So that's what Satan looks like. Now, we're going to progress to Revelation 17 and Revelation 13. So not in numerical order, but in chronological order. So the beast of Revelation 17 actually occurs in time before the beast of Revelation 13, okay? But we're going to look at the characteristics of the scarlet beast, and remember, we're trying to understand how does this relate to Daniel's 4th beast. So in Revelation 17:3, it says, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Okay, so John has a vision of the end times beast. Remember, John was the beloved disciple, just like Daniel has the vision of these 4 beasts, and Daniel is going to hear several times in the book that he is greatly beloved and highly favored from heaven. Okay, so John has this vision of a beast that's of scarlet color with 7 heads and 10 horns. And did you notice no crowns are mentioned? Okay, now remember, the devil, Satan, in Revelation 12 is the great red dragon, 7 heads, 10 horns, 7 crowns. And what we see here is this beast in Revelation 17 is scarlet in color. Scarlet's a lot like red. So there's an association between the beast of Revelation 17 and the devil. So the devil is working behind this beast. And the beast in Revelation 17 has 7 heads. The dragon had 7 heads. The beast of Revelation 17 has 10 horns. The dragon had 10 horns. But remember, the dragon had 7 crowns. And no crowns are mentioned on this scarlet beast. Okay? So the fact that we're dealing with 10 horns harkens back to Daniel's 4th beast with 10 horns. And we know that's the last empire on the earth before Jesus comes to rule and reign. So the fact here that we have 7 heads and 10 horns, this is another picture of that end times empire that is ruling planet Earth before Jesus returns. But no crowns are mentioned. Okay, what that means is we're in the first phase of this beast. When the 10 crowns appear, we will know that the 10 kings have come into power. And that will happen in Revelation 13. So let's read some of these details. Revelation 17, verses 8 through 13. "The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit." Okay, so let's pause right there for a minute. We've been talking about the fact that that last kingdom may have 2 phases. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we have the legs of iron extending into the feet of iron mixed with clay. So we see 2 phases of something similar. We also talked about the fact that the Ottoman Empire was on the earth, the Islamic Caliphate. It was dissolved in 1923 and replaced by the Republic of Turkey, but there's been talk about reviving an end times Islamic Caliphate. So that's a possible understanding of what's going on with that beast. If we look at that beast in a collective way, if it represents a collective government. However, if we take all of the power of that beast and focus it into an individual, then this beast that's described can also be the Antichrist, right? He was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. We're going to read here in a minute in Revelation 13 that a beast rises up out of the sea. The sea is a place of chaos, of destruction, of danger. It's the place where the Leviathan lives. By the way, at the end of Job, when the Lord is talking about Leviathan and Behemoth, many say, well, is it, a hippopotamus and, some sort of dinosaur? Or is he talking about the beast from the sea and the false prophet that rises up out of the earth, all the way back in Job, right? The sea beast, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the land mentioned there in the last couple of chapters of Job. So rising up out of the sea, the Leviathan coming up out of the sea or the bottomless pit is a very old concept from the Bible, that the devil himself lurks in chaos and he wants to ascend to power on the earth. Okay, so the interpretation is given in Revelation 17, and even though the interpretation is given, it's still going to leave you a little bit questioning, at least it does me anyway. So verse 9, and here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. So here the angel is interpreting the heads of the beast. Remember, the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. So the angel says the 7 heads are 7 mountains. They are also 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, the other is not yet come. So if we take the perspective of John, who was under the Roman Empire at the time that he received this vision, one possible explanation is that the heads or the mountains or the kings or the kingdoms represent these successive empires that have ruled over Israel over time. We've already made a connection between the 7 heads of Daniel's 4 visions, but also if we look at the great enemy nations over Israel, we have to backtrack a little bit and go all the way back to Egypt. Think about Israel and Egypt under the oppression of Pharaoh, right? And then there was the Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom of Israel, the Babylonian captivity under which Daniel is suffering. Then we've got the Medo-Persian kingdom, Greece, and Rome, okay? And then Bible teachers have often called that last one the revived Roman Empire, but we're also considering the possibility of an Islamic caliphate. So that particular passage said, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. So from the perspective of John, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kingdoms had run their courses. Their kings had fallen. 1 is, this was the one in power as John was receiving his vision, and the other has not yet come, right? 5 have fallen, that is Egypt through Greece. 1 is, and the other has not yet come, okay? So then we can begin to make a connection between the beast of Revelation 17 and all of these empires that we're studying in Daniel 7. Okay, and there's more. It says, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7. So depending on our perspective, if this is a collective understanding of the beast representing empires, as we're seeing from Daniel chapter 7, then the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7, we can say, well, the 7th here could possibly be the original Islamic Caliphate, which has been dissolved, yet will be revived again to be an 8th empire, but it's of the 7, right? So that's definitely a possibility. Another way of looking at that is considering the horns. Remember the little horn who represents the Antichrist? If we're looking at an individual application of the beast of Revelation 17, the little horn uproots 3. If you take 3 from 10, you've got 7 left. And then there is the little horn, which is the 8th, but he is of the 7. So there's a couple of different ways that you can look at that. And I don't fixate on either one. I'm still learning, right? Are we looking at a collective application here or an individual application? But those are just possible ways to think about that riddle. Then we proceed to the horns, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So remember up here when we were counting heads and horns, we said this first beast of Revelation 17 has 7 heads and 10 horns, but the crowns weren't mentioned. That's because those 10 horns, those 10 kings have not yet received power. They don't get their crowns until they have received their kingdom. So when they get their crowns, that means that we are at the very last part of the reign of Gentile empires on the earth. And we were told in Daniel 7, that's going to be for a time, times and half a time, or 3.5 years. Okay. So that's the first phase of the end times beast. Remember, we said Daniel's 4th beast has 2 phases. It connects not only to the legs, but also the feet and 10 toes. Well, in Revelation 17 and 13, we're going to see 2 phases of the same beast. Okay, and here's how we tell. Let's go ahead and move to Revelation 13. In Revelation 13, we're going to see a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And do you see it there? 10 crowns. So the beast from the sea has 7 heads and 10 horns. So it looks like the dragon. Remember, the dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns. It looks like the beast of Revelation 17 with 7 heads and 10 horns. What makes this one different is that there's 10 crowns, right? So the 10 crowns on this beast coming up out of Revelation 13 says that we're in the 2nd phase of that beast. Remember, Daniel's 4th beast has 2 phases. The beast of Revelation has 2 phases. The first one is Revelation 17, the scarlet beast. It doesn't have crowns on its horns yet. Well, when it rises up out of the sea, we're told it has 10 crowns. That means that the 10 kings are in power. It means that we've reached the time of the 10 toes of Nebuchadnezzar's statue. Okay, and again, Revelation told us that the 10 horns are 10 kings, individuals representing kingdoms or nations, right? And Daniel 11 says that the king of the north is going to uproot the Egyptians, Libyans, and what was the other one? Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia shall not escape. Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, okay? So this beast rising up out of the sea of Revelation 13 is the very last phase of the beast. You can see it as a collective governmental empire, but all of that power is eventually going to be focused. Daniel told us it was a little horn. Revelation 13, we're going to see all of that's going to be focused into an image, okay? Daniel saw all of his beasts rising up out of the sea, and that's exactly what John sees. Daniel saw 4 distinct separate beasts because they were going to be 4 distinct empires that were yet to come in Daniel's time. But John sees this last beast as a conglomeration of all. What that tells us is that all of these empires are really different aspects of the same power, right? The dragon has 7 heads and 10 horns. So it's the red dragon that's been working behind all of these empires. By the time we get to Revelation 13, they've all run their course, but it's different pictures of one power, and that's the power of the red dragon. So Daniel sees them distinct and separate. John sees them as a conglomeration of all. Now look at verse 2 up here. Okay, the last phase of the beast of Revelation. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, his seat, and great authority. So this beast of Revelation 13 has a body like the leopard, so it's going to be like the Greek Empire. It's got the feet of the bear to trample with. It's got the mouth of a lion to devour with. Okay, and there's a fourth beast there, and that is it's the dragon. The dragon gives this beast its power. So once again, John is seeing this conglomeration into a single beast, but it's like a leopard, bear, lion, dragon. Daniel saw them as four distinct separate beasts, which means they were going to be rising at discrete moments in time on the timeline. By the time we get to the end, we realize, oh, it's all the same beast. It looks Roman over here, it looks Greek over here, but guess what? It's all the same power with different heads, okay? So once again, those heads are just the red dragon raising his power through different facades. Think about Greek and Roman mythology. It's all the same stuff, they just have different names. Same stories, but they rename them. So it's all the same conglomeration, right? And so in Revelation 13, Daniel's fourth beast, plus the three that came before, all end up in this end times beast. And again, in Revelation 13, it has 10 crowns, which means we've come to the very last phase of the empire. Now, we are told in Revelation 13:5 up here, if I go back to this passage, Revelation 13:5, there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. Now remember, the little horn had eyes like the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things. And here the beast of Revelation 13 is speaking blasphemy. Power was given unto him to continue 42 months. If you'll remember from Daniel 7:25, the little horn that we're talking about has a time, times, and the dividing of time. Okay, so the beast of Revelation 13 with a big mouth speaking blasphemies is given power for 42 months. The little horn of Daniel 7 rules for a time, times, and half a time. So can you see the correspondences definitely connecting there? The beast of Revelation 13 is speaking blasphemy, hatred of the saints, and the little horn does the same, right? The little horn has the eyes of the man, but is speaking great things and blasphemous things. And just like we see in Daniel's fourth beast, all of the power of that end time governmental empire becomes focused in this little horn. In Revelation 13, we see all of the power of this beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns concentrated into this image, right? The false prophet causes them that dwell upon the earth to make an image to the beast and requires worship of that image. So the horn with the eyes of a man and a mouth speaking great things also appears here in this image. Okay, so looking at Larkin's diagram, here's Daniel's fourth beast. You can see the little horn rising up there. And again, it's going to be the little horn that we study in Daniel 8 next week. This is the singular person of the Antichrist. This also is reflected in the nature of the beast of Revelation 13, and that is concentrated in the image. And remember, it wasn't too long ago that we were studying Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being forced to worship this image, which had the 666 all over it, right? And so yet another correlation between Daniel and Revelation. Everybody good? Y'all have any questions? You got everything mastered? Let's finish, and then I'm going to ask you some questions. From the passage in Daniel, also in Revelation 13, in Daniel 7, the little horn is given power for time, times, and half a time to trample, to stamp upon, to practice, and to prosper, to cast truth to the ground, to change times and laws. We talked about setting up kingdoms and taking down kingdoms. That's only the power of God. But we could also consider the possibility that in the end times, the third temple will be rebuilt in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. The Levitical sacrifices and practices will have been reinstated, And so this little horn is going to come in and change all of those times and seasons. He's going to change the feast days. He's going to set himself up as the object of worship, as opposed to allowing sacrifices, which point to Christ, to be made. And so he's going to change times and seasons. He's going to trample upon the holy people, specifically the Jews. And in Revelation 13, that's exactly what we see of the beast. The image is set up, worship of the beast is required, and this beast is blasphemous, hating the saints, hating the Jews, and setting himself up for worship and in place of God, which is consistent with what the New Testament teaches as well by Paul. So Daniel 7:21-22, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. So this little horn will prevail against the saints. He's going to trample upon them. He's going to break the power of the holy people. But it says until, that means his time is going to come to an end, until the Ancient of Days came and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So we can think of the passages in Revelation 12. They loved their lives not so much as to shrink from death. So by the word of their testimony and the blood of the Lamb, the end time saints will suffer and be oppressed and murdered and trampled by the little horn. Yet they have to keep the faith, because that little horn's rule will come to an end until the Ancient of Days comes and sets up that millennial rock kingdom. So what we've seen from this lesson in the past couple of weeks is that Daniel's 4 beasts correspond to Nebuchadnezzar's dream in chapter 2. There's definite correlations there, although we can consider those 4 beasts having modern day applications. It's a possibility, something to think about, right? But we're also seeing that the 4 beasts of Daniel, specifically the 4th one, has correlations to Revelation as well. And just as Daniel's 4th beast represents not only the legs of iron, but the feet and 10 toes, we see 2 phases of that end times empire in Revelation. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns in Revelation 17, and then the second phase of that beast, the beast that rises up out of the sea with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 10 crowns. So that's the time of the 10 toes. That's the very last few years before Jesus returns. The little horn is a picture of the Antichrist, also seen in the image of the beast. Remember, we talked about the image having the number of a man, the name of the beast, or the number of the beast, or the number of his name, which is 666. 6 is the number of a man, right? So just as the little horn has eyes and mouth speaking as a man, the image has the number of a man on him as well. And that image, that little horn, will rule for 42 months, times, and half a time, and will be successful. But until the Ancient of Days comes and takes his seat and gives the kingdom to the saints of the Most High.